Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to the startup series. And before we get to today's topic, a very quick introduction to new listeners and people who are back who know me. Hey, I'm Govind. I am looking after Arctic Invent. We help startups and companies uh, be ready for their next round and also help them with their enterprise value and preventing them against the copycats and help them with be more innovative in whatever they are doing. And I always believe that and most of you will agree that your team is your heart of your business, no matter what you do, no matter what business you are in. And building a strong and talented team is crucial for success for your business, which is why Arctic is continuously looking at enhancing our team. We are always trying to find ways to have more people, have better employee engagement, better work environment, and of course, help employees to also gain their knowledge. So in today's, it's all about team. Everybody says that, okay, tell me about your team. But one of the bigger problem is how to create them, how to create the most conducive environment so that they produce the best work and how to keep them happy and also engaged in whatever they are doing. To help us, I have with me Neha Astana, a talent acquisition management specialist who works with Dentsu. And of course, Dentsu is one of the world's largest advertising company. And whatever we discuss today is Neha's personal opinion. So I do want to put that disclaimer upfront. And it helps fast growing companies find and hire really talented people so they can grow even faster. She helps them with successfully scale up, build their employer brands, and to become some of the most desired places to work in. Welcome to Startup Series, Neha. And before we get down to all the insights, practical advices, could you please introduce yourself to our audience and tell us a bit about your journey, how you ended up in talent acquisition and management? Over to you.
Thanks a lot, Govind. It's a pleasure to be here. And I'd love to talk about my journey in talent acquisition, which began almost about 18 years ago when I decided to pursue recruiting as a career in response to my curiosity when it comes to knowing what is it that makes people tick, what is it that drives people. I've been fortunate enough to have the opportunity to have established and run my very own successful recruitment consulting firm, HR Interface, just a year after graduating for the better part of a decade. And then obviously taking a very conscious decision to come back to the industry in 2014, because the idea was to get a deeper immersion and more diverse learnings that I didn't take the time for, right after graduating. So it's been more than a decade now, and I'm enjoying every bit of it on this side. And I must say that I've had the good fortune of working for diverse industries as a conscious choice, of course, which has helped me learn a lot from a 360-degree angle about how recruiting and talent acquisition differ from industry to industry. And because I chose to be a generalist within talent acquisition, or the talent acquisition itself is a specialization, but within talent acquisition, as I always say, the umbrella is so wide. There are so many things for budding talent acquisition folks, or people who are already in talent acquisition to choose. So I chose to sort of work across the entire spectrum. So you have employer branding, talent strategy, industry mapping, building talent communities, candidate experience, recruiter coaching, recruitment tech, psychometrics. And I feel like I'm just getting started. So it's been a great journey so far, Govind.
Great. Well, thanks for sharing, Neha. And I'm sure it's going to be a very insightful session. You have touched almost every bit of HR, and of course, there is always fun in the community. It's HR is always about organizing fun events and rangoli, which is not true. I think HR is the most crucial part of the whole ecosystem in any business. Now, getting started, fun apart, let's get started today's topic of building a rockstar team for a startup. Let's start from broad and then narrow to the specifics and how to really do it. And of course, a quick reminder to all our audience to put questions in the comment section so that we can also get that in the conversation and also we get answers from Neha one to one. So Neha, is what are the common mistakes startups make when it comes to hiring and building the team, and what are some of the things they are doing it right?
Sure. So if I were to start with the absolute basics first, Govind, I would say the numero uno mistake that startups could perhaps make is not getting their employer brand out there and not taking the time and effort to differentiate their employer brand. As of 2022, a total of 80,152 startups had been officially recognized by the Department of Promotion of Industry and Internal Trade in India, or known as DPIIT. Imagine being one of those 80,152 startups and then posting a job online, right? So once talent attraction has happened, mistakes can happen at any point throughout the entire recruiting value chain, throughout the entire recruitment process. From not giving candidates a great experience, like a great candidate experience, to not, fleshing out your job descriptions to give a proper understanding of what role it is, to, not having competent interviewers, whether it is in the recruitment team, whether, these are your hiring managers, to not having interviewers show up at the designated time and place. But mostly, I think a grave area is to be, when you're hiring for a startup, is not knowing what competencies are to be hired, keeping in mind the startup's short-term and long-term plans. I think that's extremely important.
Sure. So great. I think to best kind of my understanding is, of course, that branding as an employer is also important, and also, if you promise something in terms of uh, being on time, then you should also be the same. I think one of the lessons that I also kind of learned in this journey was that a lot of time people say that let the candidate wait, just to see their patience, and that's absolutely wrong, strategy I ever heard. That why will you wait a person to meet you just to test the patience, right? I think that's what you're saying, that we have to, of course, they have to brand themselves better, every startup. So I think
Yeah.
great insight that now, when it comes to hiring a talent, what qualities they should be looking for. I think, of course, there is a JD for that, but is there some kind of checklist that they should be working out, follow to access if they are hiring the right person, right? And how do you balance the need for technical expertise and other important qualities like teamwork, communication, problem solving when evaluating candidates for a startup team, right? So, what would be your thoughts on that?
Sure. So, Govind, I'd like to reference a post I'd written on LinkedIn once, which was, basically about your first 1,000 employees, hire right or firefight, right? So this basically spoke of how do you build a core team. Of course, I'd written 1,000. It doesn't have to be 1,000. It can be your first 50 employees, your first 500 employees, but this becomes your core team. And I think when hiring the core team, which is going to then percolate all of the values, all of the ways of working to everybody in the organization who then comes in later, I think it's very important to make sure that your core team building is extremely important. So when I was talking about core team building, in this post of mine, I referenced another very famous festival in India, which I think a lot of our viewers and participants today would know. So I'm talking about Janmashtami, right? So you've got the festival of Janmashtami, where you have all of these great teams of these people who climb up in like a human pyramid, and then you have the pot at the end of the rainbow, right? So so of course whoever reaches that is someone who wins. So I feel that if you take that example in terms of how that thing is built, who are the people, it's not random, it's not people just climbing on top of each other to reach the top, right? It is, I've actually spoken to some of those folks, and there is a lot of strategy, months of planning, checking for various aspects which go into making sure whether that amazing pyramid comes crumbling down or it stays up, right? So I think that's an excellent analogy for startups, because they are also building towards the top. They also want to reach that proverbial pot at the end of the rainbow filled with gold. So I think a couple of things that core team building sort of should take into consideration is that first and foremost, whoever you're interviewing, whoever you're getting on board in this core team has like a very high level of shared passion, shared values, enthusiasm, respect for the entire idea of the startup, right? It should not just be just another job. So interviewers need to figure out in their way of interviewing, how do I get this person's intent? Is this just another job? Or so just to give you an example, when I decided to come back to the industry, my very first job was with a real estate tech portal at that point in time known as housing.com. I had been working with them as a consultant as part of my own company. And honestly, I was very passionate about what they were building because, the product, to the way they work, the culture, all of that was fantastic. And that was one of the reasons which, sort of prompted me and said, hey, there's so much happening on the other side. Let's go and, like, get a taste of that. So yeah, there was a shared level of passion that was there, right? uh, of course, there are, a lot of other things that I would hire for when I look at someone joining this core team. I will hire for integrity, I'll hire for loyalty, I'll hire for collaborative ability, someone who has high EQ, because when you're working, in startups, there's no nine to six, or, you know, it's you're working around the clock. That the whole time that I've worked with startups, I don't remember taking a weekend off. It sounds really bad, but I was super passionate about it, and every moment was fun, right? So you have to have a high level of EQ, other than being from a really superb college or a B school, and bringing a superb ton of IQ to the table. EQ is, that emotional quotient that allows you to have empathy on the table, that allows you to sort of understand what's happening. Because when things run very fast, there can be tempers, there can be misunderstandings. Communication can go awry. So I think it's very important to hire somebody who has a decent to a good level, or high level of EQ, right? I would like to hire someone who, when given a lot of autonomy, would love it, but also would be a high accountability person. So it's a high autonomy, high accountability person. I would hire a hustler, because startups, by definition, firstly, are being led by hustlers, So you need hustlers to be you. You can't hire someone who would want to go and work for a government job for like 20 years, right? I mean, you come and you may not be here. It's a tour of duty. So you may be here for 1 year, 2 years, if you're lucky. Some very few of those, tend to go into the 5 years and 10 years. But hey, but you build something amazing. So you need to be a hustler. And last but not the least, hire for appetite, right? Does this person have the appetite needed that a startup needs? Because a startup is a very different creature from any other organization that you can hire for it. It's like a very demanding girlfriend, right? So who's never happy with anything that you want or that you give. So I think you have to have the kind of appetite to put in the hours, but not just the hour, but the same amount of enthusiasm and morale that you would put on a Monday, that you would put on a Saturday or a Sunday also, if you have to work. So just a few things. That this checklist can go on forever, but just a few things.
No, I think what you shared. Of course, even that checklist is kind of daunting task, because I think if you think about it, it's like one of my coaches and mentor used to say, it's like finding an ideal son-in-law. It's you will find something or other to kind of be uh, there is always like a long list of things. But of course, for hiring for startup is a different conversation. Like you said, a lot of proper kind of checklists are there. How to find those people will probably come later in the section of our discussion, because I think we are going broad to narrow. So I'll probably ask you some tools and techniques how to really narrow these candidates, how to find them, where to find these folks.
Of
But
course.
I think one of the of course the trend is that, of course, uh, a lot of layoffs are happening. Of course, in the bigger organizations, Google, Microsoft. Of course, they have been considered as one of the places to work. Of course, Google has been dream company for, I'm sure, for many people, for their sleeping pods and the kind of food they used to do. And of course, it's not coming very nicely out when their laying off happens.
Yeah.
And of course, many of such companies. So, what are the traps that startups should not fall into, and how can they avoid them, especially when they're building the brand for themselves as an employer? That would be great.
Sure. That's a great question, Govind. Thank you so much. So, I remember back in 2012 and to 2015, that was a time when the word layoff had a big taboo that was attached to it, right? I mean, if you're one of those companies that is sort of laying off people, means you're not a safe place to work, and that would affect their brands really badly and whatnot. But I think because it's happened so much over the last decade, that people have now normalized it to some extent. I'm not saying that that should be normal, but my point is that if you're on the business planning side of any startup, you will understand basis your understanding with your investors, basis what kind of market you saw in 2 years ago, what kind of market exists now, and what do you have to do tomorrow. The pivots are very fast, and I think when anyone joins any startup, they sort of have an unwritten agreement, that hey, the business is going to pivot. If we don't have money, we're going to have to let you go. All of those things happen. And I think a lot of people by now are smart enough, and the kind of people who get into startups, have a particular personality also in terms of, as I said, the appetite and whatnot, right? But now, when you ask what are the pitfalls that the startup themselves should look at avoiding when it comes to, seasonal layoffs, cyclical layoffs that are happening all the time, I think my two favorite words are sustainable hiring, right? So don't hire 10 people, hire two or three really good people or four or five really good people. But so you really have to think, and you know what, it takes a lot of restraint on the part of the talent acquisition teams, on the part of the human resources teams to go back and tell business that I know you just got, 200 million, but don't just blow it all away. I know you want that, best, coder, or, that best marketing head honcho, or all of those kind of people, but just slow down. Here is my thought. Let's do this. Tell me, what do you need? What is the outcome that you want? And let's work towards it. And I'm going to give you the people who are going to fulfill that, because you need somebody who's going to talk to the founders that way, right? So I think there is a fair amount of restraint that startups need to go back and think like a bootstrapped company. Now, just to give you an example, I have been a part of a startup, and immediately after that, I was a part of a bootstrap tech firm, which went on to be acquired for almost $1 billion, right? An Indian firm, without funding, without anything. They were completely bootstrapped. So I think a couple of lessons that I learned over there were you have to think every day. You shouldn't just make big plans for the year and then say, okay, are we executing it? You need to think every day, what I'm doing, is it reflecting what my larger goals are? Because at any point in time, that flourish can come in, that feeling of feeling flush with money can come in, some success can get to your head. So I think startups really need to stay grounded, which is very important. And believe it or not, applicants, talent, candidates are actually going to, hold that in high admiration, because that means that the company actually cares about whether they will have runway for the next 3 years to be able to pay out those salaries or not, right? So sustainable hiring is I think extremely important, and it's a function of a lot of planning, of a lot of understanding between the founders and the HR and TA teams, that they have their best interest in mind, and they will still reach the ambitious targets or the changing markets that the company wants. Because some companies, and I've heard this, trust me, I've had one of my CEOs walk up to me and say, Neha, I want to hire 100 CXOs. I said, do you know what 100 CXOs cost? So that's going to take you another round of funding. So stuff like that, right? So I think it's important to, have that humor, but at the end of the day, know that let's be sustainable and try and avoid this. But at the end of the day, hey, if it has to happen, it will. But sustainable hiring, I think, is a thought process. It's a practice that should be put into discipline.
Sure. So great. Thank you for sharing. And I think the lesson is, of course, sustainable hiring. Be mindful of hiring. And one of the conversation I was having recently with some very successful entrepreneurs was OPM. Other people money. And when you get OPM, other people money, it gets into OPM, right? So you just it's probably one of the most. So it's like other people. It's a drug, right? So you sometimes get high on OPM, right? When you get OPM, other people money, you get really like a high, like a OPM, and like very very rightly said on being very very sustainable, mindful of hiring, and also even if there is a fund available, use it with care. And I think this was, of course, one of the conversation we had in the previous LinkedIn Live with Rajiv, and from finance guy to HR, everybody's saying the same. That's of course one of the important lessons that I can of course say that is very common in those conversations. But having said that, one of the largest challenge is in the market is competition, which is fierce, and everybody looking for best, the brightest. Probably nobody working towards building one, and everybody is just fighting for them. Now, how can startup compete with resources that maybe funded companies or the larger companies have? And are there any unique advantages, maybe a bootstrap startup or companies who may not have that kind of resource to against the larger companies, right? Because I think money is of course one of the factors which kind of motivates people as well, along with other things. But what's what's your view on this conversation on how to compete on?
Sure. So that's a great question right there, right? I mean, all of us at every point in time in our lives, whether as companies, employers, individuals, whether as talent themselves, we're always thinking, how do I make myself more attractive, right? How do I get what I want? How do I compete for limited resources? We are thinking this at all points in time, and I think one of the the good news definitely for India at least is that today we are sitting on a demographic dividend, which means we have the youngest average working age population in the world right now sitting here. But that also means what's happened is the competition is suddenly doubled and tripled, because now you have the world's eyes on India. And earlier, if people were just going to close by countries, now you have the whole world recruiting from us and recruiting aggressively, right? So I feel that today, for anyone to be competitive, and don't get me wrong, there are large organizations today also that are not attractive. It's not that everybody is attractive, because the whole attraction proposition, or that whole paradigm changes completely basis who your target audience is, right? So today, when you know that you have Gen Z, which is at the workplace, right, and this is a generation which is my favorite, by the way, and it's a generation that I've been studying much before they came to the workplace. But I feel that today, to be competitive, you need to know who your target audience is. You need to speak their language. You cannot speak in the language that maybe companies spoke 10 years ago or 15 years ago, and continue to say that, hey, you know what, we have these benefits, we'll give you insurance, we'll give you medical, we'll give you foosball table, so and so and stuff like that, or we'll give you ESOPs. Now all of these things, trust me, because of the proliferation of online discussion forums and sites like Glassdoor, everything has been minutely scrutinized and taken apart by talent. Everybody knows what they're getting into when they get into a company, to the extent that now when someone goes into a company and they say that, okay, we'll give you this much of fixed compensation, but you know what, I'm giving you this much of ESOPs, right? So talent is turning it down, saying that 99% of startups today fail. Did you know that? I mean, how can I trust that what you give me is actually going to translate to money? So that attraction needs to be backed by value proposition that actually is relatable to the talent that wants to come on board. And the moment you've got that in place, you've got your attraction strategy right there, and it's going to be bees to the hive. It's going to be like that. So I think it's important to get your proposition, employee value proposition, in line with who your target audience is, with what do they want, and how are you being perceived in the market. I think it's important to be aware.
Sure. Well, I think very rightly said that you can't really fake it in today's world. You can't really fake it on any of these conversations. That you cannot pretend to be some company or somebody who you are not. I think everybody sees through it, which I think is a lesson here. And also, it's very important to kind of be true what you're offering. And it's like like to your clients, when you're saying that, hey, you're offering something to the client. I think it's one front where you also need to be thinking and selling yourself. So I think that's the lesson I kind of get here, and very very valuable. And I think it's uh, something that you have to practice to make it real, right? Otherwise, you can't really do it. So I think very very rightly said.
Absolutely.
Now, and of course, when they say, of course, talented people want to work for a company that, like you said, Gen Z, and it's not only about ESOPs and football table. I think now it is more about your own belief. What is the growth? What is the goal? And it does it align with my thoughts? And I think that's where talented individuals are kind of inclining towards. Coming to that kind of conversation, what are the common strategies that you would suggest for creating a positive and supportive work culture to retain that talent over the long term? Because that is something I believe is the bigger challenge, to retain them. Even if you have them, then how to retain them. So
I will be very humble here for a second, and I will say retention is better than recruiting, right? It's a better part of recruiting. So today, if your company, has invested a lot more into retaining your people, they say a penny saved is a penny earned, right? So I feel that retention, of course, needs to be extremely strong for recruitment to do its job, because a question that recruitment can get asked also very often is, why are people leaving so often from your organization? So you're trying to hire me. Do you guys have a hire or fire culture, or are people not happy? Why they're leaving so early? All of these questions start coming to recruiting. So recruiting and retention go much more hand in hand than somebody could think. But so I feel that today, when you say that talented individuals want to work for companies which align with their values, with beliefs, growth, goals, you're absolutely right about that. Of course, today there's a reason why you want a job, right? Either it's purely financial and you don't care about it, or you don't care about the finances, you're good there and you just want to grow something, you want to have experience in something, and learn something in the initial years of your career, or at the later years of your career, want to do like a passion project. So today, your motivations as a candidate can be anything, right, that bring you to the workplace. But once you're at the workplace, you are in that ecosystem, and I think it's very important for the entire team, the HR teams of the company. And it's not just the job of the human resources team. Let me say this: I feel every person who is a manager on the business side, the founders of the company, all of them are equally responsible to work with HR hand in hand to be able to retain their people, right? So I think a large part of this, and this theme keeps coming back to me a lot, I feel, is purpose and meaning. So whether this is done via catch ups with your team quite often to understand whether they are feeling of doing something purposeful, meaningful, is aligned with what that team is doing, with what that company is doing, with what that industry is doing. I think it's very important, because as long as they continue feeling purpose. See, with startups, what happens is, many number of times, pivots are the order of the day, right? They'll say that, okay, let's change the strategy because we were doing this until yesterday, and I don't want to do this now. I could give an example, but it's not very PG-13, so I'm not going to talk about it right now. But I was interviewing somebody who's worked with an astrology startup, and he was giving me the reason for why he left the company. So he said that while I love everything about astrology, wellness, and we felt that we were helping people out with their problems and whatnot, the company pivoted to something which was pretty shady, and of course not keeping in line with what. And this guy was almost a chief marketing officer. So today, if a chief marketing officer feels his purpose is not being fulfilled in an organization, he or she would leave, right? So I think that purpose, the meaning, what the company is doing, these kind of conversations need to be had. And it's good to change. I mean, of course, if you're in a startup, you will change, and that change is the order of the day. But I think then HR needs to have excellent communication, with the employees. To see, anything you communicate, it's not what you communicate, but it's how you communicate it, they say, right? So if you're able to put that forth to your employees, saying that this is why we are doing this is why we are changing, and if they still believe in that purpose, maybe they'll stay. So I think purpose is incredibly important. Meaning is very important. Other than that, see, I'm not going to talk about your basic factors, which everybody knows, because this is not that kind of a conversation. Whether it's good salaries, good office spaces, culture is something that I talk about all the time, about how it is not a coat of paint, but it is the cement of your organization. So if the walls are falling, it's because you've not put in the bricks, with the cement properly, right? So company culture is incredibly important to whether you're able to retain your employees or not, and create a positive, supportive, productive work atmosphere for them. Yeah.
Sure. So, just to kind of course, uh, like you said, people leave managers, probably not the companies, but, extending this conversation just to kind of take some practical bits out of it. What would you say that 5 best practices or couple of best practices, especially on the retaining side, would you like to share, like
Sure.
some things that absolutely to be done? That would be that.
Absolutely. No, of course, this is something that I keep thinking of. Now, Govind, of course, this is not my daily bread and butter because I am in talent acquisition and not in HR. Like you pointed out, we don't do rangolis, dude. So talent acquisition is more, I think it's more like sales and marketing function in any company because we are working on attracting talent and selling the job to the talent, right? But anyway, having said that, I feel what my peers in HR, do or work on, and that, some best practices that, we have discussed and I feel would really work on an ongoing basis is to firstly change the lens with which they're viewing employees and organizations today and change the practices which existed earlier, because what worked earlier may not work now, right? Or may not work as well right now because the world has changed. So you're applying those practices to a world that no longer exists. So obviously you will not see solutions. So I think what's very important is firstly to, as I said, recognize, do it contextually, understand who are the people that are working with you. Now, see, startups largely, and I've been part of two big growing companies, which went from 0 to 4,000 employees, and we saw that. But average age over there was say 24, right? So today, when you're talking about the average age of folks who are say about in their 20s and early 20s, and what are their needs? What is it that they're looking? Are they looking at recognition? Are they looking at, as I said, purpose? Are they looking at perks? Are they looking at flexibility? How do they take their work so seriously that rather than you go to them as a manager and ask them, what, I would like to have a performance management or performance appraisal chat with you, they themselves reach out and, do a chat and say that, what, I feel that my performance has been lagging and I'm so sorry. I think my laptop is I'm about to just lose. Just have to go and plug it in. Just please give me a
No
minute.
worries. Take your time. I think
Just
got it in the meantime. No worries. I think in the meantime, if any of the listeners would have any questions, I think it's a great time to get a sip of water if needed, and also put some questions, especially on the talent acquisition side. Um, and I think while Nya is back, I think one of the lessons that I had was, and I firmly believe in, talked by many good coaches around, is typically three are the three elements of autonomy, purpose, and mastery, which really help in this conversation. I think that's also, as a best practice, is to align these things um, on on these areas. So yes, so Neha, I think you're back. So you were saying
Thank you.
something.
Sorry about that. So I plugged it in, but I forgot to switch it on, right? Right. So I know I heard what you said, an excellent encapsulation of what you're looking for. But so as you said, depending on what your employees are looking for, I think it's important to figure out your best practices accordingly. But as I said, this means fundamentally changing how things were done because everybody's tired of it, and that's why you see all the HR memes of
Yeah.
rangoli when people are like, dude, we don't want to do rangoli, we don't want to do zumba, we don't want to do all of that. Let's sit down and let's talk about how I can maybe add 5 more skills which are more forward looking and future looking, right? So
Yeah.
so HR teams have to evolve, company teams, business teams have to evolve with the times and understand that when people are spending as much time in the company as they do it at their homes, maybe sometimes even more, they're spending half of their lives with you. So it's important
Mm.
to understand what they want and then go according to it. So some best practices for me would definitely be putting in, more frequent open communication firstly in place, right? So today, if you're talking to your employees once in a year and during your performance conversations, do it once every quarter, do it once every month, more the merrier, better. So that's definitely something because you may not know when an employee is happy, when an employee is not happy. And because you have frequent check-ins, I think that can really help you to keep, a finger on the pulse and figure out what's what. So I think that's extremely important. Um, Other than that, I feel some best practice. Now I don't know if I can give you 5 exactly, but generally it's about understanding the pulse of the organization and then working accordingly. So I would say no, do employee listening, have learning and development facilities in-house, so your people are happy, they're feeling like they're learning, they're doing great work. Compensation happens to be a big issue why people leave certain organizations, so make sure that whoever your employees are feeling well compensated for the kind of value they bring into work. If you're going to go and not pay salaries at some point in time, that's obviously going to be a bone of contention for people who have EMIs and whatnot. So make sure that you have that runway for your employees. But yeah, largely I think employee listening itself is quite magical if done correctly and if done consistently, and that can help, because if you're listening, then 1,000 ideas can come out of that, so it will change from
Sure.
company to company.
Sure. No, absolutely great point. And I think in it, I think over communication is the buzz here. Like, sometimes you have to over communicate to kind of retain, and it's probably the best practice we prevent.
Yeah,
And you touched upon one of the very important aspect of training and professional development, right? And
right.
uh, one of the aspects that I have found that, of course, it is important, as I understand that it's like you already mentioned, it's very, very important how to keep the engagement up in these kind of, initiatives, because, uh, of course, it is important aspect to, talent retention. I think one of the, my personal favorite question is that uh, how to really engage people in such training and professional development, because, young people may or may not understand that it's a great learning and development initiative. How to get them on board? I think that is what I would like to understand, personally as well, because I think that's one of the areas that we want to also understand, that how to motivate, not motivate, but let's say make them understand that it is important, and they need to be on board in these initiatives. Uh,
Sure. Well, that's a great question. And Govind, I've been very fortunate to have worked with some brilliant, talent development or learning and development teams, training teams. In fact, with my previous organization, the success of the talent strategy, the hiring strategy, was based on the success of my learning and development team, because they were the ones who were able to uh, so for example, if we're hiring folks at a particular cost, we're going to colleges, we're going to campuses, hiring them young, we're keeping our costs in control. But that means obviously they're not experienced, they don't know what they're doing. So today, if the learning and development team is able to fill in the gaps, to train them really well, I think that firstly, the advantages of having a great L&D program within the organization is brilliant. So other than the cost aspects, the upskilling aspects, uh, to think of how do I get my employees to be engaged in a learning and development program is, to again, communication here also, right? To first understand what are the learning needs of the organization, like what the organization expects these employees to know, to learn, to be successful in their day-to-day jobs. Now, other than this, I have seen an uptick in a trend. I don't know if it's an India thing or it's a global thing, but self-learning, or self-education has been a theme that has really become very evident to me. So today, if an L&D team sort of figures out, okay, these are the skills or aspects that they have to compulsorily train and learn, these are the aspects that I can give them some sort of a canvas to come and tell me that, hey, this is what how I this is what I would like to learn, this is how I would want my learning journey to be. And at the end of it, what's more important is the strategic part of L&D, right? Where you're able to tell somebody in your organization, this is where you've been the last few years with respect to how you have used your, abilities and your competencies. We would like to, sort of devise a program where we understand where you could potentially be, and if that is a place where you want to go, because today I think people are most invested when you are going the same way as them, right? If you're walking with someone in the same direction, they are more engaged, they are more invested. So it's also to understand the self-learning aspect. No, one example of this, for example, was with one of my organizations. We had given all of the employees, like a complete LinkedIn learning access, right? So they could just go on to LinkedIn learning, click on any course that they wanted to learn, if it is how to make great presentations, how to conduct superb interviews, how to make great sales pitches, whatever it was, or be great at Excel. So all of these courses were available to them on the click of the mouse, right? So I think if you give people the opportunity to learn and then sort of talk to them through it in terms of making sure that you both are headed the same way, I think there's a lot of engagement that can happen in that way.
Sure. No, great. I think absolutely this is something great. And the only thing I say, and of course, on the fun side of it, the competition with that LinkedIn Learning is Netflix. because,
Really?
because I think I think it's a matter of choice that would I want to spend like a few hours on Netflix, or would like to learn new skills. And I think it's something that not everybody would be choice with wise with their choice, so to say, right? I think that has been kind of my observation. But of course, I completely agree that self learning is the buzzword, and I think alignment with a larger goal with people with communication is important, right? So I think
Yeah.
that is something I kind of take away as one of the learning here. Let's touch, and as we are closing to the conversations end. One of the very very important topic a lot of people are talking about is diversity and inclusion, right? I'm sure as a talent acquisition professional, I'm sure it must be one of the major KRAs, or maybe some way or other it is in the conversations. So, how important do you feel is diversity and inclusion? And people, is it really a fad? Does it really play any role in building a team at a startup? And what practical steps the startup can take to ensure that they are creating diversity and inclusiveness at work?
Fantastic question, Govindan. DE and I, is one of my favorite causes. And I feel that today it's important for us to be a little honest with ourselves, right? Because I've read through and heard of enough number of case studies in this area where it is being used as, like a buzzword, or, it is being done because people are supposed to fill a particular quota of their hiring basis. It's maybe not so much in India, but abroad, it's a big thing with, the whole uh, Black Lives Matter, and working of different people from different ethnicities, in a company. What is a company actually doing to encourage them? Are they hiring people from each and every background or not? LGBTQ, all of these kind of things. Which I feel that today for a startup, it is not just if they actually realize the power of diversity, equity, and inclusion in hiring, and the fact that it actually is a blessing in disguise, that it does so much more for your company than you think it is. It's, as I said, it's not a coat of paint. It's actually culture. Again, this for me is culture, the building culture of an organization, being inclusive, being equitable, right? So how I can sort of simplify this is by saying that today, for a startup especially, it is incredibly important. In fact, all recruiting teams within startups have to be sensitized to the fact that let us not hire unidirectionally, let us not hire all the same kind of people, because then it is like the story of they say the lemmings, like they jump into the water together, right? At one point in time, there's some season, I don't know if this is fact or fiction, but my point is, you are headed in one direction. If that direction by some chance happens to be success, good for you. But I feel that it is very important to have diversity, of background, diversity of thought, and diversity of experience in all of its shades in a startup, especially because the richness that diversity brings in, I think, is unparalleled. It's absolutely unparalleled. And I have always been a very strict believer in it. And I think if so, I can give you an example of a startup in somewhere close to, like Chennai. I had read up about maybe many years ago. They only chose to hire differently abled folks for their startup, right? Only differently abled folks. They had 100% plus growth year on year, and they had like no attrition, right? People completed 4 or 5 years, and that startup had grown 500% in like about 5 years. So I feel if we understand what DE&I truly brings to the table in terms of diversity of thinking, imagine the products that your company could make if you're not hiring all from the same B school and certain kind of people who fulfill certain kind of requirements. But you're like, no, forget about it. Let me just go to this particular undergrad place and let me check if this person who's done some vocational courses and this one person wants to join me. That's diversity of thought. Let me see if I want to hire somebody from a different ethnic background. Like gender parity is the most commonly spoken of things, like how many women versus men are working in your organization. But again, are you also paying them equally, right? It's not about, oh, we have a 50% gender parity. No, but is someone of the same position as a woman getting paid equivalent to someone who is not a woman? So I feel all of these conversations are very important, and if researched sufficiently and experimented with sufficiently, I think there is more than enough of proof that DE&I is one of the best things to happen, and I think the more you get into it, you will realize the magic that can unfold. So it's very important for any organization.
Sure. Oh, great. Thanks for sharing. I think it's one of the very, very important aspects, and especially at startup and MSMEs, and of course, corporates are more aligned and kind of talking in LinkedIn. I think it's a bit of a corporate, but I think a very valid suggestion that startup must also look for these parameters when they're hiring. So thank you for sharing. But and also like how that startup can measure the success of their talent acquisition effort, because it's also come down to the performance of the talent acquisition teams as well, and what metric they should be tracking. Is it like
Sure.
number of candidates they interviewed or what? I mean, now I'm trying to get to more practical aspects, and then I'll also ask some more practical questions, but this is one
Sure.
of the questions,
Sure.
that how they really kind of measure this the talent acquisition efforts.
Sure. So, Govind, while traditionally speaking, almost anyone on the other end of a talent acquisition function, the receiver who's receiving talent, will always talk to you about time first. People need people as of yesterday, right? That is what I've heard more than saying someone coming and telling me, Neha, I want the right person for the role. Forget about how take 6 months, I don't care, but make sure that you get me the right person, right? Nobody says that. Instant gratification in recruiting is probably a very integral part of how organizations function, how they flow, how they work. But I feel that metrics in talent acquisition need to go a revamp also, because it is the most important function which can decide the trajectory of your company's doom or absolute success, right? So I feel that, so today for me, personally speaking, I always tell my hiring managers that I never feel that my job is to just close your position within a particular time. While I'll do that, I'll come to you after a year and I'll ask you, how is that hire doing? Or I'll come to you after 6 months and ask you, how is that hire doing? So for me, it is very important to understand whether that person was a right hire or not, how game changing that hire was. Because in a startup today, each and every hire has the capacity to change the trajectory of the company, with a great idea, with a great product feature, with just about anything, right? Anything can change. A great product manager or a, great coder or, like engineer or somebody in the marketing team or someone who does content, anything, anyone can really change the trajectory. So it's very important to sort of figure out, okay, what are the metrics that are the most important to me? Let's do some sort of an evaluation and think about it. So obviously I put myself under that magnifying glass, and I started thinking, today when I'm hiring for my team, what are the things, what are the metrics that I would choose if somebody is hiring for me? Because we as recruiters never think of ourselves as hiring managers also, right? But I think we should put ourselves in those shoes every now and then to understand how the experience on the other side culminates. And then I realized, whoa, even I need somebody to join my team ASAP, right? So I guess that time thing will just sort of go on, and we're never going to stop, needing people ASAP. So that instant gratification can stay. But I think other than time to hire, some of the metrics which I feel are exceptionally important are, have you put in, like a psychometric test into your hiring? How does a person stack on that test? uh, there are certain psychometric companies that do things like success profiles, which means they will profile certain people in your organization in certain functions and create a benchmark profile, which then becomes a test in itself. So then when anyone who's interviewing for that role will go through that test, and then they stack up to that person, and if that person is perfect and fills their shoes, then you know what, you've got a perfect hire, right? So I think those kind of metrics also become very important to think of. How do I make my recruiting more scientific or as perfect as can be, right? So definitely extremely important. And see the other metrics like, time to hire, cost of hire, all of these things, I feel organizations do have a handle on it now, because you wouldn't really invest in working with a consultant or a recruiter or an external vendor, which is going to cost you more, if your internal team is able to hire everything. There is a business impact also. So it's not that you're just losing that money. You might hire someone who might make you more money because they came in on time into a particular role because you hired through a consultant when your internal team couldn't do it, or they were too busy with other roles. So I feel that time to hire is a metric that companies can solve certain figure if they want to take it, but final impact of that person in that position, there should be certain metrics which tell you more about that than anything else. That's something to think about.
Sure. No, great. And one of the, I think practical question, and I think comes a lot of times, is where to find these people. I think there are many tools now. LinkedIn is there, Hirect is there, Naukri is there. So I think, what is your favorite tool, and what is your favorite place to hire?
LinkedIn. We're talking on
Okay.
LinkedIn, and LinkedIn is my favorite. It's so fun fact. Back in college, also my final year project was on LinkedIn in 2004, 2005, and not a lot of people had actually heard as much about LinkedIn, and LinkedIn was just getting started. I know they've hit
No.
100 million members right now, I think, in India, and that's phenomenal, right? So for me, this product has evolved very beautifully. And while you have a ton of great recruitment tech companies, and Govind, great question, because I think if I leave my job as a talent acquisition head, recruitment tech is the next thing that I'm getting into. And my dream is to build a product which makes it as easy for a layman to do hiring for their own company as it is for a candidate to make sure that when they go onto that platform, they find a job, right?
Sure.
So for me, yes, there are lots of other companies which have come in, but now, just in the name of innovation, you've got, AI based organizations, which are trying to do what recruiters do on a day-to-day basis, which makes your work easier, sifting through thousands of CVs and whatnot. That way, there's so much now happening in the recruitment tech sector over the last many years. But somehow, I have sort of been a LinkedIn fan since day one. So I just tend to sort of get deeper and deeper down the rabbit hole of LinkedIn when it comes to it. So if you're able to get a recruiter license, for yourself and for your team, I think that by itself will, save a lot of your time in recruiting, candidate experience management, building funnels, all of that, everything is taken care of. So it's pretty brilliant.
So, what would be your second? So, let's say the LinkedIn one, then what would be your second choice? Of course, LinkedIn is like everybody knows, but any secret tool that you believe is coming up and could be like.
So in ATSs, I like Greenhouse quite a bit. I've used Greenhouse at one point in time, evaluated it. Darwinbox, I think, did a pretty brilliant job also, considering, and they've just got funding now, which is like a testament that they're doing pretty well. But largely these, because I tend to sort of keep it non-complicated. So for me, LinkedIn definitely does the job, but Greenhouse again is a great ATS. Lever is a great ATS. Darwinbox is also awesome.
Great, and I hope your manager did not listen that you may start up, or if some investor is listening, then find Neha. She is thinking on a big area of unmet need. So I wish you the best with that venture if you go in that lane, as a
Thanks,
startup.
Govind.
switching on the other side, when so it's probably my last question for the day as well, is that what should startup look for when they're hiring talent acquisition management professional like yourself, or they are kind of trying to find somebody who
Sure.
can do it for them? Should they go to agencies? Should they hire? What would be your advice on that?
Sure. So, Govind, as much as any company would want to and say that I'm just going to do this one thing, life isn't perfect. And at some points in time, it tends to be a mix of two or three different aspects from time to time, right? First, I'm just going to talk about how do you build your talent acquisition team in a startup, and then I'll come to how do you choose an agency. Okay. So I feel that today, you have startups which are in various sectors. So you may have, health tech, you may have insure tech, you may have fintech, uh, food tech, all of these. I've worked with prop tech, which is real estate technology. So there are different sorts of companies. So while when you're looking for a team, it's okay to look at recruiters who worked in those traditional industries but have a penchant for tech, right? So I think that always works, because what I realized was, before of course my stint with the real estate tech company that I was working with and that we scaled up, um, I was actually hiring for a lot of real estate companies as well, right? So I knew that, because the folks at the end of the day were the sales guys and the marketing guys who understood the place, and whether it was the operations guys, the government liaison guys. So the a recruiter is as good as two things: one, their existing network, and I would say two, as good as their reach, which is sort of a sub point of the first one. So I would always look for someone who has a network already. Like when you're hiring for sales, you look if somebody has, like a black book of names of you know, uh, customers in a particular segment or in a particular industry, right? So that's very important. So for me also, I think it's important to get people who know the industry that your startup is in, and have a penchant for tech, or have already double-hatted and worked in tech as well, right? So now that's about building your team. But I feel that when you're working with a consultant also, instead of working with 10, 15 different, and I'm saying this having been an ex-consultant myself, right? Because I was on the other side of the table. It is growing your consultants with you as you go. Choose three, choose four, and make sure that you give them like a lot of good work, and they work with you, because only those folks, I think, are able to give you really great candidates, and do background checks on them, make sure that there's going to be no issues and challenges. So I think it's important to cultivate your vendors, and not necessarily just about picking up a particular consultant. Of course, there are consultants who have specific practices. So, keep an eye and ear on the ground in terms of, which consulting firm has a practice that, my company is in, and would do me the benefit of working with them. So I think that really helps.
Sure. Great. Thanks. Yeah, I think we are just in time. But if you have to share, like, in the topic of building a rockstar team as a takeaway for the session today, what would be the few things that you will say as a takeaway and kind of must-do things for startups? That could be the main takeaway for the conversation we had.
Sure. So I'll just quickly summarize. I think we spoke of a lot of things, right? Firstly, do not hire unidirectionally. Don't hire everybody of the same kind. Try and see how you can diversify your hiring, because this is insurance for your company, to make sure that it does not go in any one particular direction only. So I think don't hire in a unidirectional manner only. That's very important. Secondly, I feel use the right tools, extremely important. Like, don't have to invest in 50 different things. I see startups who take, some sort of an AI thing. They'll take a Naukri monster, different platforms and IIM jobs and LinkedIn, and then work is not getting done. Also because your candidate experience is suffering, because you don't have the time to give to each and every one of these wherever people are reaching out to you. So keep it limited, keep it clean, and make sure that you're utilizing those tools to the best of your capacity, right? They say a bad workman always blames his tools. So be a good workman, have only a few specific portals or platforms that you'll work with, but use it to the maximum extent. So that also is very important. And finally, I would say, hire people, in the image of people who would found a particular company, right? So they have to have entrepreneurial way of working. They have to have, that hustler's attitude. They have to have the appetite, but also hire good people, who want to be good to people, because otherwise you'll not be able to create the culture which will become the cement that is going to make your startup grow into a mega unicorn or decacorn someday. So I think hire good people. It always helps. Good people make good places, I always say.
Absolutely. I think company is a sum total of the people it has. So I think thank you, Neha. Thank you for sharing so
Thank
much of
you. Thank you
knowledge
so much.
just in time. But before you let you go, where can, of course, I'm sure you are pretty active on LinkedIn. So I hope you are okay with our listeners reaching out to you and asking some questions if need be. But thank you, and I wish you the best. And also,
Thank you, Govind.
if you ever start this HR tech, I wish you the best, and probably the first user
Thank you
as
so
well.
much.
So I promise you
Thank you.
that.
I appreciate it. It was really great. All the best.
Great. Thank you. Thank you once again to all our audience attending the session. I hope Neha has been able to answer your questions, and feel free to put the questions after the session as well. I'm sure we will reach out and answer those questions. And one of the exciting news that I have is on the next LinkedIn Live event, we are going to have Professor Jaideep Prabhu from University of Cambridge in around 20th March, and we will be talking something very, very interesting on how to really create inventions and innovation in a more frugal manner, right? We are very excited to host this session in the month of March, and Holi is coming, so I wish you all the best. All happy Holi as well, and of course, follow me on Arctic Invent, or connect with me, and also follow our page to get updated about these LinkedIn lives, and do not forget to follow Neha as well for acquisition and talent acquisition tips and tricks. Thank you, and see you at the next live event. Thank you, and wish you the best.